As the sun set over the Abu Dhabi racetrack, the sun set over the 2019 Formula One season, and what a season we have to look back on. The race itself was like watching paint dry, and due to some shoddy director work, we even managed to not see the only two exciting overtakes on the last lap. Lewis Hamilton leaves us with a big stamp of authority, and Ferrari tried to do a double stack pit stop which blew up in their faces. So a pretty standard Grand Prix then for us to review for the last time this year. Hello and welcome to the TF1 Show's recap of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the last race of a spectacular 2019 season, and unfortunately a race that didn't really compare to some of the amazing Grand Prix we saw throughout the season, I think. I'm your host, Tinus Ferreira, and today I'm once again joined, albeit it's been a while, by Lawrence de Prier, my partner in F1 crime. So Lawrence, I think we can agree that the F1 season unfortunately went out with a bit of a whimper after a really exciting couple of races this year.
Hi everyone. Yeah, Tinus, I think we've been treated with a lot of great races this year. I think it was good to be a Formula One supporter in 2019.
So I guess typical to Abu Dhabi, and not really a lot of intrigue to discuss, I think, before we get into walking through each of the teams and each of the drivers. So let's start with the victor, the championship winner, Lewis Hamilton. I think finished off his 2019 season with a big exclamation mark, just dominating the field, I think, this whole weekend. There wasn't really anyone that was able to touch him, not his teammates, not Verstappen in the Red Bull. Ferrari were way off. This was a commanding performance by Hamilton, I think.
Yeah, it hurts me to say this, but this is basically what this is like a perfect example of Hamilton's career. If he starts at the front, he's going to dominate the race. And what did he win by 20 seconds today? Yeah,
and I think this shows, and I've actually mentioned this a couple of times over the past few episodes of the podcast, is he's just such a complete driver now in terms of his abilities, where if he starts from second, third, fourth on the grid, you still think he's in with a shot of winning the race, given how well he can race wheel to wheel, how he's able to conserve tyres but still follow cars closely. And then on the other side of the coin, races like today where he just takes a complete lights to flag victory, starting on pole position, leading every lap of the race, setting the fastest lap on I don't know how old hard tyres 2 laps before the end of the race. Charles Leclerc even asked during the podium interviews, he just asked Hamilton how the hell did he manage it, what was it, a 139.2 or something, so close to the end, because I don't think he was even being close to being able to get a lap time like that. So yeah, a commanding performance by Hamilton, and I still think he's a driver very much at the peak of his powers
at the moment.
Yes, yeah. I think especially in race trim. Qualifying was a bit more of a struggle for him this year, but I don't think necessarily it was him that wasn't doing the job. I think more the Mercedes definitely wasn't as competitive on the Saturday as what it was on the Sunday. Probably a mixture of how strong Ferrari's qualifying pace was with their engine, and Max Verstappen took his opportunities when he was presented with them, I think, in qualifying as well. So yeah, 5 poles for Hamilton, so tying with his teammates. But yeah, I think all around, just what can you say? He won 10 races or 11 races this year, I think. So another brilliant season by Lewis, and I look forward to see him come back next year and see if he can continue this incredible run of form that he's been on.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just to stop at Hamilton for a second. As a non-betting man, if I were a betting man, I wouldn't bet against him today. I just had the feeling he was going to dominate this race. And I think that speaks a lot of like where he's at in his career.
I think if he got away cleanly, I think that his one sort of risk area was at the start. If he got a bad start and Verstappen could maybe jump him. But he got away, got a good start, and then he just walked away from everybody else. He was never under pressure after that. So, yeah, great performance by Lewis, and well-deserved champion, I think, again this year. Now, let's talk a bit about his teammates. So, Lawrence, I don't know what you think, but I think this was one of Valtteri Bottas's better performances in the Mercedes this year. Especially, obviously he did have, and I think we can agree and say that Mercedes was the fastest car this weekend, race car and qualifying car. But I think Bottas did well to do a lot of quick, clean overtakes early on in the race at a track that's not so easy to overtake at, to put himself in a position to actually finish. He finished ahead of a Ferrari and a Red Bull. If you think about the fact that he started right from the back, and Vettel and Albon started, 5th and 6th? Or 4th and 5th? That should tell you what a good drive Bottas did put in today. I think the fact that he was able to cleanly pass so many cars early on was a real X factor for him today.
Yeah, for me, undoubtedly the best drive of his season.
Yeah.
So I think so without even benefiting from his first stint, I think on the 10th lap he's gained 11 places.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Like on the 11th
lap. Yeah, I was already in the points,
after
the first, yes.
So, I mean, that's good.
And that's good to see for Valtteri, because I think if he has a couple of areas where he loses out to Hamilton typically, one being obviously overtaking, and I think being decisive with overtaking moves. And if he can work on that and be a bit more decisive next year, maybe, I guess, overtaking the midfield is maybe a bit easier, but just if he can be a bit more decisive in the way he races wheel to wheel, I think that will definitely bode well for him over the next season, and he's going to need it. I think he's been comprehensively defeated now by Hamilton for 3 years, and I think he was desperate to put in a bit more of a prolonged effort and a prolonged campaign against Lewis in the Mercedes. So I think he'll leave with his head held high. He admitted freely, and he said he thinks this has been his best season yet in Formula One. I think
implied. That speaks again to how good Hamilton is at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Hamilton had that championship wrapped up. I mean, after Germany, I'd say. I think Germany, Hungary, before the summer break, we were like, well, this is basically the championship. So, yeah, I mean, Hamilton is just, and I think when we talk about Verstappen a bit later, I think having those two as a teammate is just such a difficult thing. So good for Bottas for putting in a good last drive, and let's see if he can pull a rabbit out of the hat in 2020. Now let's speak about our second place finisher, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. I think we all thought that, or hoped at least, that he would be able to push Hamilton a bit more. A lot of people said that Red Bull's race pace was on par with Mercedes's on Friday, so when they're doing their Friday running. I wasn't as sure. I think given how strong a Mercedes was on a one lap, and given that they were relatively much better in race condition than what they were over one lap qualifying, I thought that it's going to be a bit of a stretch for Max to be able to challenge. And so it turned out to be. I think Verstappen tried, but he was never really in the position to do anything. And I think especially if he wanted to do something, it would have had to be right at the beginning of the race, and then he got passed by Leclerc on the first lap. So that then meant that he first had to somehow negotiate his way past the Ferrari, and then by that time Hamilton was so far up the road, I think he realized then that it's probably going to have to be second if there wasn't a surprise safety car or anything like that. But Verstappen was good. He was good this weekend.
Again, yeah, I think it's impossible to have beaten Lewis Hamilton. So he did what he could. He overtook Leclerc after his mistake on the first lap.
Yes.
I mean, that's about job done for what from his
side. I think from their perspective, I think maximum probably for them was P2, and he was able to deliver that. And I think if Verstappen wants to put together a championship campaign next year,
he's going
to need performances like this, where I think it's not necessarily, and we saw it with Hamilton as well, he's only finished off the podium, I think, twice this year. I think in Germany and in the EU and in Brazil. I think, were the only 2 races where he didn't finish on the podium. Let me just have a think about this. Might have come 4th somewhere else. But the point that I'm trying to make is, you need to win the races, obviously, but it's basically, if he can maximize his performance every race, there are going to be races where the other teams are going to be too fast, but then despite that, still being able to pull a P2 or a P3 out of the hat. That's sort of the type of consistency you want for a World Championship campaign, and that's something Hamilton has perfected over the last couple of years, where even if he doesn't have the fastest car that weekend, think about Monza this year or Spa, where the Mercedes wasn't the fastest car, the Ferrari was the fastest car, but Hamilton was still able to come home in P2 even though Ferrari won the race. So, and even if you think about qualifying, think about Russia, for example, where Ferrari was the gold standard car there in qualifying as well. Hamilton was still able to split the Ferraris to put his car in P2, and I think Verstappen has that same ability to make sure that despite maybe a slight disadvantage in machinery on the day, he can still put himself up there and really make himself be known as a driver more than anything else. So I think good performance by Verstappen this weekend. Nothing exemplary. There wasn't anything where we just went like that blew any of our minds, but he did the job he was supposed to do, and I think that's what we can say about that. Now, Albon, I'm going to be very frank, I was a bit disappointed with him this weekend because I think the last couple of races, he always had a bit of an excuse to fall back on, where he could have said that, listen, it was the first time ever for him driving at the track. He's never driven at, the US Grand Prix or the Mexico circuit or even Suzuka. He's never driven those tracks before. So it's always going to be a bit more difficult for him to get up to speed in a weekend's time compared to, let's say, Verstappen, who's now been driving there for a couple of years. But he has actually been driving at Abu Dhabi. He's driven here in Formula 2, I think, the last 2 years. So I was really sort of hopeful that he could give a bit of a better account of himself. But yeah, he was very upfront about it, where he struggled in qualifying. He couldn't get close to Max at the end. And in terms of race pace as well, was a bit of a difficult time for him. He really wasn't able to keep pace with the top 3. I think his pace and Vettel's pace was pretty similar, but I guess we'll talk about Vettel a bit later. But yeah, not a great weekend by Albon.
Yeah, I'm also quite disappointed in his performance. I really hope that Albon could do what Gasly couldn't, but at the moment it just seems like Verstappen is outperforming whatever teammate you slot in there.
So, and I'm interested to understand, because obviously I think there's enough's been said about Verstappen and how good he is and how difficult he is as a teammate. But I also wonder, and it's sort of been alluded to even when Gasly was struggling, is that I think the Red Bull car is a very difficult car to drive. I think if you get into it, it doesn't seem to be a car where you can just get in and go and be fast out of the box. And I think they alluded to that when they were talking about Gasly's difficulties. And I wonder if Albon maybe has the season and he can actually go through the full pre-season testing and processes and sort of really get into grips with the car. Obviously, Verstappen has now been used to that car for years, whether it could make a difference. But, at the same time, it might make no difference, and it's just purely down to the fact that Max is just a much, much faster driver. But given that it's now 2 drivers that have struggled in a similar way, I think
2 drivers that looked really promising.
Yes, I don't think. Look, Verstappen is good, but it's not like he was a half a tenth ahead of Daniel Ricciardo, and Daniel Ricciardo is also a good driver. But then again, I also don't think Albon and Gasly, I don't think they're half a second slower than Daniel Ricciardo necessarily. I just think it's interesting to me. I don't know. This is just me speculating, and I'm interested to see if Albon can get a bit closer. I do think the advantage he has over Gasly is his race performances so far. At least with Albon, is Red Bull knows that they'll get the top 6 finish or the top 5 finish consistently. Where with Gasly, he was languishing in 8th and 9th place during the race, and he couldn't get past the McLarens and he couldn't get past the Toro Rossos, and it was just, that was a difficult time to watch, I think. But so interesting, I think, couple of months for Albon ahead, because
I think it's going to be like a defining year. In
definitely, I think next year there's going to be nowhere to hide for Alex. And then I don't know. The only thing with Red Bull is if Albon doesn't work out, then what? What do they do then? Because I don't think they're going to put Kvyat back in the car.
I'm putting my money on a big move to get Vettel back.
You think so? Could be. I mean, they all have out of contract next year, but yeah, could be. I'm not gonna argue against that, but let's see. And talking about Mr. Vettel, let's maybe talk about him and his team, Ferrari. Now,
such an average race for Vettel.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a good race for Vettel. I think Ferrari as a team were definitely on the back foot this weekend. Interestingly, now I'm also, and I'd like to just be a bit smug for about 10 seconds if I'm allowed to. But people kept saying after Singapore that Ferrari have basically miraculously cured all of their problems with the slow speed corners, and that they now have this incredible engine and aren't losing time in the corners anymore. It's still the same problem. I just think it was coincidental that the tracks later on in the season suited their car a bit better than at the beginning of the season. I think they've probably improved a bit, but I mean, if someone can tell me or explain to me how losing 17th in the final sector in Abu Dhabi is better than losing 17th in the final sector of Hungary, it's basically the same problem.
Yeah.
So I think fundamentally that Ferrari still has a few issues to sort out. Might have been masked by Mercedes. I think they went through a bit of a dip with their car setup over the last couple of races. Red Bull were very upfront about the fact that, especially in the Singapore race, they dropped the ball in terms of getting their car prepped for the track. So, now Ferrari, I'm sort of stumped again because I don't actually know where they are in terms of their package. Because if they struggle like this in the early races next year, then we're going to have exactly what we had this year. Where in races like China, Monte Carlo, Barcelona, it's going to be the same story of Mercedes' high downforce package just beating them out every time. But yeah, I think Vettel, let's start with Vettel maybe. Obviously, he is a father for the third time, which is very exciting. That's why I missed the sort of press day on the Thursday, because his wife gave birth, I think, on the Wednesday. So congratulations to Sebastian Vettel for that. He was okay in qualifying. Nothing special. I think they were a bit hampered by the car. And again in the race.
Yeah, his second run was disappointing. I mean,
yeah, but that was also a function of sort of all of the heavy backing up that they were doing. All of the teams were sort of really trying to cool down the tires before they started with or maybe not cool down, but just get the tires in the right temperature before they started their flying lap, which then meant they all backed up right before they finished the end of the lap. And then because Ferrari was so let's say ambitious with their timing, and we'll talk about that now, with sending out their cars for the final stages of qualifying, things were a bit marginal for them at the end, which then meant Vettel couldn't really get his tires in the right temperature window before he started his final run. So that's sort of what happened with him there. And then obviously it also meant that Leclerc wasn't even able to do his final run in qualifying. So that was a bit of a... Let's talk about that now, actually. That was a bit of a stupid one by Ferrari. I think, Mattia Binotto came out after qualifying and said, but they knew they were going to need to take a couple of risks because they were slower than the other two teams, and they thought, with track evolution, if they come out right at the end, they might have a shot of stealing second or third from Verstappen. I don't think it would have made a big difference. If they were too slow, I don't think track evolution would have made that big of an impact. And they just made themselves look stupid again for the 100th time this year. So
I think that they had enough pace to challenge Verstappen at least.
You think so?
I don't think that Red Bull was that much faster, like on the one lap pace.
I don't agree. I just don't think that Ferrari really had it in their pockets. I think that first run for them was as good as it was going to get.
Well, they outqualified Albon. What was the differential between...
No, it wasn't big. It was about what was the differential between Albon and Verstappen? I think it was about 5 tenths. So the two Ferraris sort of slotted in between.
Yeah.
So maybe, but was it worth the risk though? I mean, Leclerc didn't even do his final lap.
Yeah.
I think they should have just firstly made sure that they can do their final runs, get a bit of a slipstream maybe, and but they took the chance, and I guess that's the way the cookie crumbled.
And I mean, like in terms of Vettel's final lap, just one more thing I want to add there is, I think if either Verstappen or Hamilton, what differentiates them almost from the Vettel of the last year is that I think a Hamilton or a Verstappen in Vettel's position would have produced a lap on that like pressure moment, and that's not Vettel. What Vettel hasn't been able to do.
But it's funny because he used to be the sort of king of that. He was really always able to. Him and Hamilton were the two that were able to, especially in qualifying, pull a last minute qualifying lap out of the bag and sort of steal pole position from the person we all thought was going to sort of get it.
And I can't remember him doing that since his horrible crash
in Germany last year. Yeah,
I think
true.
Vettel lost a lot of his
confidence,
and
no, that's definitely the case. And I think then contrast that with his teammate who has all the confidence at the moment, especially over one lap. And Charles Leclerc winning the award for he has had the most pole positions over the year with 7, so he's out-qualified everybody this year in his Ferrari. So that's, I think, a great achievement for someone in their first season at a big team like that. And he's going to have apologies for a very vocal bird there in the background. I think Leclerc is going to give Vettel a lot of headaches next year. I think especially in qualifying. It's going to be tight between them. I think Vettel has pulled up his socks a bit over the last couple of races where he has been much closer to Leclerc than what he was. I think, think about, Belgium or Monza. But, yeah, Leclerc is going to give Vettel a lot of headaches next year. And the two of them are going to give Ferrari a lot of headaches next year because, as we saw last week or 2 weeks ago, they are very much not going to play the team game if it means one of them are going to be at some sort of disadvantage. So, if we can quickly talk about Leclerc's race, I think he was shocked yesterday when he heard how much time they were losing to the Mercedes in the last sector. We were all shocked as well. And Leclerc, I think he did the best he could. Similar to Verstappen, I think he sort of took the machinery he had on the weekend and he maximized what he was able to do. I think third was a good result for him. And he pulled a good move on Verstappen on the opening lap. Was a bit opportunistic, tried to make things happen for him. But I think the Red Bulls were too fast on race pace at the end of the day. But and I think we can also then just congratulate Leclerc on third in the championship. So for those who don't know, obviously Hamilton won the championship, and then Leclerc's fourth in the championship. Sorry, Verstappen is third in the championship, and Bottas is second, and Hamilton is first.
He did beat Vettel.
But Leclerc did beat Vettel, which is the point I wanted to make. So he did also beat his teammate over the season in terms of points. So,
and that's massive for
a rookie.
For a rookie in his first season to beat someone like Vettel. Vettel is still a four-time. Sorry,
you wish.
I wish. It's tough being a Ferrari supporter lately, but it's still like a massive achievement to come in your rookie year and beat Vettel.
Yeah, so I'm just very excited to watch these guys go head-to-head next year. I really hope that Ferrari and Red Bull and Mercedes we can have close racing like what we had this year. If we can have the top 6 drivers just going head-to-head, especially I think I want to see Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc go head-to-head. I want to see how that goes and just watch their respective abilities measured against each other. So very excited by that, and I think a positive end to the season for Charles Leclerc after a bit of a shocker for Ferrari 2 weeks ago. Okay, let's touch on the midfield. Now, not much to say except McLaren, I think, had not the greatest of races for them. I think they were more ahead typically of the midfield than what they were this weekend. But Lando Norris, I think, put in one of the drives of the day. I think he had a very, very strong race. He held off his teammates, Carlos Sainz, and if you listened to my episode last week, you'd have heard me waxing poetically about how amazing I think Carlos Sainz has been driving this year. So that's been a good result for Lando, and he also won the qualifying battle between himself and Carlos. So Lando outqualified Carlos 11 times, and Carlos outqualified Lando 10 times. So he just pipped it at the post in qualifying yesterday. After I actually thought Carlos Sainz was incredible yesterday when he was in Q1 and Q2. He was, I think, 6 or 7 tenths ahead of Lando in both of those sessions, and then right at the end in Q3, Carlos wasn't able to get his final lap in, and then Lando pipped him at the post. So great stuff by Lando Norris, and I think it's going to be a big confidence boost for him going into next year. I don't know, Lauren's thoughts?
So my thoughts on McLaren is I think that they're, for me, the team to watch. They have they're in a very, very good space with the drivers that they have. I think that they're comfortable. I think that they've been improving throughout the year and improving a lot since last year.
Yes.
And I think that if they show only like mildly similar improvements and confidence, and the confidence that they have at the moment, that they might slowly but surely creep into one of the top teams next year.
I mean, that would be amazing. Let's see next year if they can make a jump the way that they did from last year to this year. I think that'll definitely be the case. Probably not going to happen. I think it becomes more difficult the higher up you sort of get in the hierarchy to win time. But yeah, I mean, if McLaren kind of pull a rabbit out of a hat next year, Sainz and Norris,
they have the heritage, they have the money.
Yes, they have the people as well.
If there is one team that can do it, it is McLaren. So let's cross our fingers for a very interesting prospect.
And I think for Carlos Sainz, if speaking about him, he locked up 6 in the championship, which is, I think, a wonderful, wonderful achievement. If you think about the fact that he was competing against Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly for that spot, both of whom had half a season in the Red Bull. So for Sainz to steal that from both of them, finish 6th ahead of both Albon and Gasly, is actually a great achievement, and just a testament to his amazing season that he's had for him and McLaren. I think Sainz came home in 10th place after a last gasp overtake on Nico Hülkenberg. And poor Lando Norris, I think at the same lap, I think Sergio Perez overtook him also, I think, in the last lap for 7th place. So one McLaren driver gained a place and one lost a place in the last lap. But all in all, a good performance from them again. And looking forward to see what they can do next season. Now let's talk about Sergio Perez. And I'll be frank, and I think he was my driver of the day. Now, obviously, he did have the bit of an advantage of starting on a tyre of his choice, so I didn't think he made it into Q2, in Q3, apologies, so which meant he could choose which tyre to start on, which then resulted in him running incredibly long into the first stint, and then bolting on a couple of nice, shiny, I think was medium tyres or hard, I can't remember, I think hard tyres, right at the end, which then meant he could pick off, he picked off Hülkenberg, and I think then Sainz and Ricciardo pitted, so he sort of got them by default. And then sort of tracked Lando Norris for a couple of laps right at the end and stole the 7th place from Lando right at the end of the race. Just as an aside, actually, I think we can just also compliment Lando for very, very good defensive efforts, because he was holding on for dear life, up until that point. So just sort of got stolen, sort of mugged a bit at the end by Perez. But Sergio Perez, and I think Lawrence, you mentioned this to me in the race, he is still a quality driver.
I can't see how it's going to happen, but it would be so nice to see Perez competing in one of the top 3 teams, and I think it's a pity for him, because I don't think it's going to happen for him with the young talent that we have. But Perez would thrive in a position.
I think he has the experience and the skill.
So it's actually a shame that we if we do not see that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those cases where, again, Perez was a bit in the wrong place in the wrong time. We got that McLaren promotion, when was it, in 2013, and then he had that one season to basically prove himself, and then, he was just a bit too young and inexperienced, and it didn't work out, and then sort of he was sort of treated as damaged goods I think, for a while after that season at McLaren, and he's locked into, I think, a 3-year contract now with Racing Point. So I think we're going to see him there for the foreseeable future. But at least he'll be on the grid, and who knows, with the Stroll money, Racing Point might become a formidable team in the near future. Sorry for those who heard a bit of a sizzle there in the background of the last 10 seconds. It was just our resident chef preparing our, quality, high standard meal for us for after we recorded an episode like this. And lots of things going on in today's episode. We have some vocal birds. We have some very interesting, loud pans in the kitchen. But hopefully it wasn't too distracting. And let's forge ahead and talk about, Mr. Stroll himself. Lance Stroll, not much to say. He had a bit of a disappointing race. I think he, again, got out-qualified by Perez. And for those who don't know, Sergio Perez himself isn't even the best qualifier on the grid. So Stroll has lots and lots to work on. And at the moment, unfortunately for him, he did close to the one podium, I think, in Germany. But yeah, he has lots to work on, I think, in order to justify him being at that team at this point in time. Obviously, Dad's money is keeping him there, but I really haven't seen enough from Lance Stroll this year for me to say, you know what, despite the big capital injection he comes with, he deserves to be in that team next to Sergio.
Yeah, and I think another thing on Lance as well is that the camera crew is starting to notice that there's not really much interesting to see. I don't think we saw even 1 or 2 shots from...
Yeah, I don't really see Lance Stroll that much, actually, in the race. You're right. I mean, he's the new Carlos Sainz. Shame. I think we at least saw 1 or 2 shots of Carlos, this weekend. Right, let's quickly move over to Renault and talk about maybe the sad part of today's race is that Nico Hülkenberg is unfortunately leaving us for a better life somewhere else. His last race at Renault also had a bit of a up and down race. I think he was doing quite well during the majority of the race, and then near the end things just sort of crumpled, and he actually was running in 10th, and then in the last lap Sainz overtook him, and then also Ricciardo got him his teammate right at the end, so Hülkenberg actually ended up in 11th place or 12th place, apologies. So yeah, what can we say about Nico? He's going to be missed. I think he's a very good driver, and as we just said, it's slightly saddening to see that someone like Lance Stroll is staying in the sport, whereas someone with Nico, who has, I think at this point, a lot more pedigree, and I think is probably the better driver, that he has to go because he's not necessarily bringing the big money. But then also, I think at the same time, he's comfortable with the fact that he isn't going to just settle for a drive in Formula 1 just to stay. He'd make sure he'd rather have a seat, or would rather not have a seat than have just any old seat at Williams or whatever that may be. So good for Hülkenberg, and we hope we see him back soon. His teammate, Daniel Ricciardo, also, I think he was brilliant in qualifying. He had an excellent qualifying lap to split the McLarens. I think he came through in 7th or in 8th place, I think, with Sainz in 9th. So good effort by Ricciardo in qualifying. Average race, I think as I said, he came through in 11th. Not much more to add there. I think for him and Sainz, they decided to take the gamble to make the second pit stop after Perez was tracking them down so ferociously. Tried to put on some new tyres and, use the last 10 laps and make up as many places as possible, but couldn't quite get there, could Daniel. But overall, I think he gave a good account of himself over the season.
Yeah, I think in qualifying, which was quite a shock for me because we all know what a good driver Hülkenberg is, and Daniel outqualified him 14-7, which is significant.
Daniel is a fast guy. I think we forget how fast he actually is.
And wouldn't it have been interesting to see how Daniel would have measured up against Max, aging Max Verstappen this year? I think it would have been extremely interesting.
I think it would have been extremely interesting, but I still think, and he would never admit to it, but the thing is that Red Bull team was just building themselves around Max. Whether Max was deserving of it at that point in time or not, they made the choice, even though Ricciardo, I think at that, if you think about the beginning of last season, Ricciardo was leading Max in the championship. He was the guy that won the Monaco, and he was sort of the guy really making things happen at that team. But despite all of that, I think you could see that Red Bull was sort of mobilizing themselves around Max, which he obviously knew meant that it wasn't going to just be a straight fight between the two of them. It was always going to be, given the benefit of the doubt, who's going to get, the advantage.
Yeah.
So I think, obviously, not yet justified in his move, given the results of the Red Bull and the Renault. But let's see, you never know. Renault can have a big off-season and come back all guns blazing. He's also going to be more comfortable in the team, so let's see what they can produce. Now, the last remaining teams, the last 4 teams, Toro Rosso, Kvyat had a good race. Similar strategy to Perez. Couldn't quite execute it as well as Sergio could, but still a good points finish for him. I think he came home in, was it 9th? Yes, 9th place for Kvyat. Similar strategy to Sergio, so good drive from him. Gasly had a incident at the beginning of the race, which meant he had to change his front wing. That basically banished him right to the back of the grid, so couldn't really make any inroads. Haas, did you see any Haas drivers or any Haas cars during the race? I didn't.
No, not at all.
Okay, so that's all you should know about Haas. Alfa Romeo, Kimi Räikkönen was sort of keeping Sainz and Ricciardo and them honest at the end of the race, but I mean, that's such a horrible qualifying yesterday. They've started basically from the back, so it wasn't, I think, really possible for them to make dramatic moves up the grid given the package that they have. So yeah, I mean, that's all you can say really about Alfa Romeo.
I think, testimony to those 4 teams. In a boring race, they were never shown on TV.
Yeah, I mean, that shows you how things are going there. I mean, especially Haas. I mean, you run out of words to say when you talk about that team, because there have been moments of excellence from, think about Grosjean. He was looking really, really good with some weird new floor configuration early on in the weekend. And then him and Bottas had an accident, and then that basically meant his whole weekend was ruined. So that's just sort of story of Haas's season. And I really do hope that they can rediscover some of the form they had previously. Williams, lastly, final race for Robert Kubica. I think it's more people putting him out of his misery than anything else. I think, kudos to him for making the comeback despite his obvious impairments. But yeah, it was always going to be a tough ask, and even especially in a team like Williams that was sort of in a category of their own, it was always going to be a tough outing. And I think he was out-qualified at every race this year. So he lost 21-0 to George Russell. And, I wish Robert Kubica all of the good luck in his future career and future endeavors. But I do think it's justified for him not to be returning next year. And then talking about his teammate, George Russell, I really, really hope, and I've said this a couple of times, he is sort of the third wheel in the cog. He's sort of Mercedes' Verstappen and Leclerc. They want Russell to show what he can do in a more competitive car, and I really do hope he gets the opportunity to, if Williams can somehow fix things over the off-season, because Russell, I think we want to see what he can really do and how, in a top car. I mean, he beat Norris last year in Formula 2, so let's see what the guy can do. I really hope he can. I think he, again, did everything he could do this weekend. He out-qualified Kubica, and then it was just the two of them pottering along at the back, as they always do. So, yeah, that's basically everything we can say about Williams. So let's move on to the TF1 Awards. Now, the Pastor Maldonado Award for Most Dunderheaded Deed has to go to Ferrari for being unable to use a watch in deciding when to send Leclerc out for his final qualifying lap. This then obviously resulted in poor Charles being too late for his final quali lap of the season. I'll do a comprehensive season recap episode soon, but I'm pretty sure that Ferrari has been the most consistent winners of this award over the season. The Lewis Hamilton #Blessed Award also goes to Charles Leclerc for the fact that the race wasn't 2 laps longer. He would have probably lost his podium if Bottas didn't start from the back, so he finishes his year on a high. And lastly, the Nico Hülkenberg Podium Award for Unluckiest Driver has to go to the award's namesake, Nico Hülkenberg, for his last lap, where he lost 2 positions during a couple of corners, which basically epitomizes his career. So close and yet so far. I truly hope we can see him back in F1 in the not too near future. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen, the final race of the 2019 season. But don't fret, you still have some TF1 episodes coming this year, and we will still have a multitude of questions to keep us going over the off-season. Will Ferrari make a power play for Hamilton in 2021? Will Albon be able to pull up his socks and challenge Verstappen in 2020? Will Nicholas Latifi do what Lance Stroll couldn't and use his considerable pockets to drag Williams out of their metaphorical dumpster? And lastly, will Ferrari finally learn to tell the time and stop sending out Leclerc when it's too late to do a qualifying lap? As always, much to ponder. So Lawrence, thanks for joining today. It's always a hoot to have you on. Thanks to all of the listeners as well for listening and chatting with me on my Twitter account and on Instagram over the whole season. If you enjoy my silky sway voice, please hit the subscribe button to be at the forefront of my future episode releases. I'll chat to you all soon. Bye.